Program and construction management as a professional service is becoming more and more widely understood and valued by owners, not just public sector owners, but private sector owners as well.
Wall Street has valued the industry higher than it's ever been.
And our focus is very much on people, developing people, promoting people, the value of people, professionals who will be responsible for managing the projects that create the built environment.
It's the hospitals, the schools, the things that we interact with every day.
Every day. And the things you don't see.
Yes.
We talk all the time about project delivery. What if we talked about asset delivery?
What about AI? Just because it's such a hot topic.
No matter what AI anybody is using, it still requires humans.
Absolutely.
It's not going to replace people because people still have to exercise some level of judgment about whether or not what AI has produced is actually the answer.
Welcome to The Build Up, a podcast by Procon Consulting, where we explore people, ideas, and innovation driving the construction industry. We have a very special guest with us today, Andrea Rutledge. She is the CEO and president of Construction Management Association of America. She's at the forefront of guiding her organization through growth, through challenges, and the evolution of the construction management practice. So really excited to have Andrea on the show. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I've been really wanting to do this show for a while. There's so much to talk about, but I thought that maybe we can just start with the state of the industry. I have been traveling all across the country to these industry events, and it's always interesting to get a good pulse of the industry by going to these events. I went to one, which I've invited you to a couple times. It's mergers and acquisitions. I feel like that those industry events really provide a good context to what is happening in the industry. One of the things that I find interesting is that Wall Street has valued the industry higher than it's ever been. And I'd just love to get your take on what's happening behind that. What do you think is we're finally getting noticed? And so I'd love to just get your take on that.
It's a great question. And it's always interesting to me to hear your experience juxtaposed against other experiences. And this is true, I think, of every industry. On the one hand, the angel choirs have opened up and the sky's the limit. And on the other hand, the sky is falling and we have, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's always that tension depending on where people are. But I think there are a lot of things in play. First of all, infrastructure money is on the move,
yes.
Right? I was recently in Connecticut and North Carolina. I was driving on highways. I saw signs. I saw construction barrels. I saw heavy equipment. And I saw this project funded by, this project funded by. I mean, it took a while to kind of get that money into the bloodstream of the industry, but it's happening. And we were talking earlier about Pennsylvania. Their whole sections of US 15 between Frederick and Harrisburg are under construction. I-83 through Harrisburg, which has been too small since the day it opened, is being made wider. Massive bridges are being replaced. So that money is really in this bloodstream, and that's moving. And so public owners like state highway departments begin to value the consulting services sector because they need the talent to supplement what they have in their personnel to get these projects delivered. So I think that's happening. I think that program and construction management as a professional service is becoming more and more widely understood and valued by owners, not just public sector owners, but private sector owners as well. I think that we are seeing, it's not quite one RFP at a time, but it's certainly one owner at a time. We're starting to see the preference for CCM, the Certified Construction Manager, in RFQs and RFPs. The value proposition is rising. So and all of that leads to a kind of enthusiasm and pride in the profession on the part of members. In the last 2 weeks, I've been to 3 events, one in Houston, one in North Carolina, one in Connecticut. These were all put on by chapters. These all had the highest attendance ever. And they were all very different. One was a lunch, one was a one-day symposium on construction opportunities in North Carolina, and one was an awards dinner in Connecticut. And people are just excited about who they are and what they're doing and what the opportunities are.
Yeah, I definitely see that from running a business, that the infrastructure bill is kind of making its way through the agencies and the departments all across the country. And there just seems to be a lot of activities and not enough of people to do the work. And so the supply and demand is kind of optimal at this moment right now. And to some extent, it's created opportunities. I really believe that right now we're at in a very, highly attractive part of our industry. We're being valued more than we've ever been, and it's some exciting times. I'm just curious, though, from your standpoint, what and how can CMAA have an impact to some of the growth opportunities you're seeing in the market? I know we're going to talk a little bit about the CMAA conference in San Francisco. You guys had such a high attendance, and it reminds me of rising tides lifting all boats. And so just love to get your take on what you think and what you're seeing there.
Sure. So I think there are a couple of ways that CMAA can do what it does, right? Which is to be the voice of the profession, to be the premier resource, to educate, develop, and promote program and construction management professionals. I think one of the things for us that is really important is this was reflected in our strategic framework, the one we're currently working with, was shifting the language and the perspective from the work to the people. And our focus is very much on people, developing people, promoting people, the value of people. Another important thing for us to constantly remember, though, is that I don't want CMAA to be a mile wide and an inch deep.
Right.
I've been in the association business a long time. I have seen a lot of associations say, we're going to solve every problem facing our industry. Only we can solve it. And they can't. They struggle to accomplish all of those objectives. So I think it's really important for us to stay focused on what we are uniquely positioned to do. And that really is professional development education, credentialing, advocacy, and engagement.
Can we talk a little bit about advocacy?
Of course.
Because I'm just interested
My favorite thing to talk about.
There's a lot of money being put into the industry. I feel like finally, maybe I'm biased, it's much needed. We have an old infrastructure in this country and also a shifting of needs that are happening, transformative power transition from carbon to renewable. We have some resiliency issues across the country. And so there's going to be a lot more needed in the investments of infrastructure.
Sure.
I'm just curious, what CMAA and their role with the legislative process or advocacy or any of that nature. What do you see CMAA doing with that?
So going into the universe of advocacy, we put a lot of thought into it and made our decisions carefully about setting the frame. Our position statements basically outline, we're going to stay out of labor agreements. We're going to stay out of partisan politics. We're going to we're not going to start a political action committee. We're going to focus on issues. It's going to be grassroots-oriented, issue-based advocacy. So we have 4 policy priorities. These were the 4 priorities for the 118th Congress, and those will get probably adjusted and reframed a little bit for the 119th coming up in January. But it's really clear for us. The value of certification and credentials, a preference for credentialed professionals on federal programs and projects, a professional job classification for construction management professionals in the federal civil service, which currently does not exist, and protecting qualifications-based selection. And so it makes it very easy to say, when an issue comes rolling towards us, right, does it fit in the frame, and does it meet one of those 4 objectives? And if it does, then we are prepared to activate our grassroots network. It's almost all electronic communication. And if it's not, if it doesn't fit one of those priorities, then we say, thank you, we're going to let that go by.
I think it's a good segue into what I think we're experiencing right now, which is a labor shortage challenge in our industry, right? There are more people leaving the industry, whether through retirement or other reasons, than there are people coming into the industry. There are some structural issues, but I often felt that we as an industry can also do more. We can promote our industry to young people that sort of breaks the mold that we're not the industry of just hammers and nails and we're a professional industry. It's exciting. Wall Street is valuing us. Our work is finally being noticed. So that's people that are coming into the industry. But then within like mid-career people, I've often felt that we can be promoting more people to come from other professions. So I wonder if you can speak a little bit about what CMAA is doing to kind of help solve some of the labor issues. We heard a little bit about the advocacy group, and it sounds like it's very centered on labor, training, certification. I think they're all important.
So I have a friend who is the walking example of somebody who started out as an attorney. I mean, law school, law firm, jobs, the whole deal. He was doing a lot of contract work, and he discovered that he would rather be administering the contract than writing the contract. And so he made the shift into construction management, worked for a big contracting firm in Maryland for a while. He's a really good example of that notion of I'd rather be administering the contract than writing the contract. I know several people who've come into construction management from architecture because they would rather build the building than design the building. And what I think, to your point about how do we promote the job, how do we promote the role, I think there are a couple of things. We were placing an ad somewhere. It was all stock imagery, right? But it was one of those things where both people were in blue button-down shirts, safety vests, khakis, and hard hats. One of the people in the image was female. And I said, if you put this out there, no parent will let their female child study construction management ever again. Because parents of daughters especially don't understand the role.
Right.
And if they see hard hats and safety vests, they're going to think unsafe.
In danger. Right.
They're going to think that their female child is in danger.
I think that's a good point.
And I said, this is a tech job. This is an office job. You occasionally might go to a job site. You might be assigned to a job site as part of your role. But the job, the work is knowledge work, right? It's how do I resolve this three-dimensional wizard chess problem of site, scope, safety, cost, schedule, function, design? How do I get it from a BIM model to an actual interchange, right? And that takes a whole level of conceptual thinking and decision-making that is not necessarily nails and nail guns.
We have, it's an image thing.
It's an image thing.
Because this industry has a broad need. We absolutely need people out in the field on a regular basis to do a lot of the construction work. Absolutely. And we also have a skilled labor issue in this country. But the industry needs people from all different backgrounds, whether you graduated from college with a STEM degree or not. I think you would agree that we want to welcome everyone because there is such a labor shortage. And I wonder maybe you can speak to that. How does somebody who maybe graduated with a liberal arts degree and maybe stumbled into construction, how do they get acknowledged? How do they get career sort of mobility upwards? So
that's sort of a softball question into professional development for me. I think that one of the things CMAA does incredibly well is to offer professional development education through our capstone program, through our learning modules, through our online courses, through all of it, that lays a foundation for this is the universe of work, right? One of the things that we often talk about either in the boardroom or in conversation, you and I have talked about it too, is there are a whole set of skills that you develop as a liberal arts major. Speaking as a liberal arts major, it's part of what you need to be able to do to graduate with a liberal arts degree, right? Around critical thinking, decision-making, research, communication, analysis, et cetera. So if someone with that education and that skill set comes into program and construction management, the next step is what do they need to know about scheduling, estimating, all the rest? Well, that's what one of the many things the standards of practice exist for. It's lined out in order to do that. The capstone, which is really the very beginning, the very entry level foundational course It is the course for math majors and English majors who transition into program and construction management. That is designed to develop that skill set that's needed for the specific role in a firm like yours, or working for a state agency, or working for a private owner. And then you can continue on and develop that. I've always been very excited. It was one of the things that I found really exciting about the opportunity 7 years ago when I was recruited for this role, was essentially this path for encouraging and inviting not just engineering majors, not just construction management majors, but liberal arts majors into the profession.
Yeah, so that's a plug-in for anyone who's out there that is interested in pivoting. It's an amazing industry, right?
It's an amazing industry.
And you could have an amazing career doing something that is tangible. You're building something that improves humankind, really, at the end of the day.
I spent a lot of time in architecture associations before I came to CMAA, and I met a wonderful woman. She was, I'm not sure where she is currently the dean, but she was dean at St. Louis Obispo. And that's one of the few schools that has architecture, landscape architecture, and construction in the same school. So she had all three of those departments under her. And she talked about going to Admitted Students Day. And she would go into the auditorium where the parents of all the students that had been admitted to construction management were sitting. And she said they were all sitting with this kind of, I don't know, this isn't what we wanted for them. And Christine, who's about 5 feet tall and has this wonderful, soft voice, would stand up in front of all these parents and say, your students are going to emerge as professionals who will be responsible for managing the projects that create the built environment. And she said, you could just watch the room. Everyone's sitting up a little straighter.
Right. It's the hospitals, the schools, the things that we interact with every day.
Every day. And the things you don't see.
Yes.
Underground utilities. I went to an awards program once, and they were recognizing a project that was all underground utilities. And it was a sensitive wetland. It was next to a highway. I mean, it was sort of all these complicating factors. And the head of the company came to the stage to accept his award, and he said, if we've done our job, you have no idea that we've been there. And I thought, now that's a whole universe of activity that no one ever sees. And if it's done right, no one will ever know.
Well, speaking of the built environment, and also your earlier reference about we have an image problem, it's technology. I'd like to just pivot a little bit about R&D. I just came back from the first inaugural Virginia Tech Smart Construction Forum. It's like a forum that had academia, government, and industry, and we were talking about the gap between research and development. And it became apparent. I mean, if you go to a lot of these events, you realize like our industry lacks in research and development, right? And so part of breaking the mold of who we are as an image, we really need to walk the walk too as well. So maybe you can speak a little bit about what CMAA is doing regarding innovation. I was just at CMAA, and AI was probably the most attended.
So what everybody wants to talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe you can just speak to that. It doesn't have to be AI, but just on innovation and what you're doing to promote that.
So it's really important for us to do what we are uniquely positioned to do. And one of the things that I've noticed in the last few years, especially as we have engaged more and more with the Associated Schools of Construction, is how much research is going on in the universities. I think there are 148 institutions that are members of the Associated Schools of Construction. They have their annual conference, and it is all people delivering their papers and on what they've been working on. Now, some of these are essentially sort of micro projects that have a fairly small sample size, and eventually those faculty want to grow those to larger research projects. That is not an area that CMAA financially can afford to play in, because for those grants to really be successful and have real meaning to faculty and institutions and scholarship, they need to be large, much larger than we are capable of giving. But what we can do, and where we have been working consistently with the Associated Schools of Construction, is to draw that research into our own publications. Now, there are some challenges there that are unique to institutions because, faculty have to publish in specific publications and journals in order to have that work count towards for their tenure applications. And I recognize that. And so my pitch to the faculty is publish it in the journals, do what you need to do for your scholarship and your promotion as an individual. But after you do that, could you send it to us? Because our members want to read it too. They want to understand how they can apply it to industry.
The implications.
They want to see what the nuggets are that might have meaning for them. I think one of the other places, and I do not pretend at all to understand tax policy, but there are tax implications of R&D, and they're not always favorable to organizations. And so really understanding what those implications are, how to educate our members about what those are so that organizations like yours, like the others, can understand sort of where the window is for doing their own R&D. I knew a faculty member in architecture who all he wanted was to be able to take his students onto a demolition site. His analogy was, in medical school, we teach anatomy, right, by dissecting things.
Yes.
Why aren't we teaching architecture by dissecting things? By seeing how a building goes together, by seeing how it came apart.
There's also science behind demolition as well. There's more that can be done with recycled materials for sustainability, and there's smart demolition at the end of the day. And so I think every aspect of our industry processes can be disrupted, and I generally feel that there is still a level of resistance to innovation and technology. I wonder, do you have any thoughts why you think there's a little bit of resistance there?
In my experience, I think there are a couple of things. I think, first of all, we have to remember that to a very large extent, even with AI and robotics and all the things, we're still dealing with weather and gravity and steel and concrete and wood and glass and various composites of all of those things. So the materials and natural forces at work, I don't think we're going to be able to change gravity. I think that's going to stay around for a while. I think there's a deep reluctance to expose quote-unquote problems or to share knowledge.
Share knowledge, I agree with that.
Because there's a proprietary interest or there's an owner with a proprietary interest. There's this feeling, and I completely understand it. I mean, when Daniel Friedman was trying to get a demolition site to let his architecture students on it, they said, no, we can't afford the liability. So I think, that kind of sits, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of
there's some
legal challenges.
There's discomfort. If we say a story of the mistake,
mindset.
Right?
I was just at a conference where it talked about that. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, if we tell the story of the mistake, are we exposing ourselves to a lawsuit?
Yeah.
Right. And at the same time, you and I both know the mistake is where you had the most learning.
Yes. I mean, that's where you learn. That's where you problem solve. You understand, hey, I think that can be done a little differently.
Yeah.
Right?
The very first project of the year that was announced when I was CEO was the U.S. courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. And it was a great story about the program and construction management team recognizing, once they opened up the ground, all the things that were down there that they hadn't really been able to know were down there, and all the mitigation and adjustments that they had to make. But they still had to deliver a courthouse within a certain time and within a certain budget. And it was the construction manager who figured out that by resequencing the tenant improvement fit-out stage of the building, they would have the money available to do what they had to do in the foundation of the building, and they would still deliver the building on time and on budget. That's the story, right? Those are the stories that we want to tell all the time.
What about AI? I'd love to get your take.
Yeah.
Just because it's such a hot topic. What is your thought?
I think that, well, first of all, no matter what AI anybody is using, it still requires humans.
Absolutely. It's not going to replace
It's
people.
not going to replace people because people still have to exercise some level of judgment about whether or not what AI has produced is actually the answer or is actually going to work. I think there's a lot of promise in AI. I think there's a lot of speculation in AI. I think there's a lot of theoretical exploration going on, a lot of if-then and what if.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it hasn't quite landed.
You need some prompt engineers. That's like a new job description now, right? It's
Right.
like how you ask the question.
How you ask the question, and then, but then
determines the outcome.
yeah, it's like blue. No, that isn't really what I wanted. I also think that there's a tremendous opportunity in the in-betweens. We had the opening panel at our national conference was that group talking about project information systems and facility operating systems. We'd also heard from Phil Gorke about how younger people use technology differently or think about technology differently, right? And he said, hey, Google, what's the halfway point for this and this number? And I thought, what if instead of, hey, Google, what's the answer to this? You could say, hey, project, tell me this piece of information. Tell me how these soffits are supposed to fit. Tell me what the clearances are supposed to be. That might be the sort of secret sauce AI for this kind of work around design and construction. But then the next level is that project system has to feed directly into the operating software. There can't be any stopping. There can't be any, now I need to scan these 47 pages into ChatGPT in order to get the operating manual for the building, right? Those two systems have to be seamless. And then the last thing that sort of twinkled in the back of my head was we talk all the time about project delivery. What if we talked about asset delivery, especially in the vertical environment?
I think you're kind of framing it in terms of it isn't a project you're delivering something of value. And so there's a lot more prominence placed on that. So I like that term and how you're framing that.
Yeah, we're delivering a building and it's an asset to the owner.
It has a life.
It has a life. It has a value to the owner.
That is beyond the completion of a construction project.
Right. I drive up and down 270 in Maryland frequently, and I got to watch all the construction of that new exit, right, with Kaiser on one side and the housing on the other. And of course, it costs $100 million a mile because you're inserting an exit into a place where there wasn't ever supposed to be one. But that's an asset.
Right.
That exchange is an asset to the state of Maryland, to Montgomery County, to the communities on either side of it. It's not just a project. And maybe as we think about assets, we start to turn the corner on what's the role and responsibility.
Right. You start taking seriously the documentation of a building, what's behind the wall, what is actually installed, so that when it gets delivered, the owner has all that information. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like how many times does a building get scanned over a period of its life cycle? Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, you realize like every time there's a renovation done, you pay an architect to come in and resurvey that same building that was originally designed and constructed. And so if we can just cut off just on the margin a few percentage of cost, I mean, can you imagine how efficient we would be?
Oh, absolutely. So there were a lot of takeaways from that opening panel. And one of the things that really caught my eye is we're talking internally about how do you increase price and schedule predictability for the owner. So that's one layer. Second layer is how do you prove the negative, right? The investment in program and construction management services early in a project. How do you know it will save you that one big awful change order at the end? That panel gave me some ideas about what the savings in construction can be with the quality of the project management information system, and then what the savings in operating costs can be with the quality of the operating system built to operate the building, right? To answer the question, where is the wet wall in this building when I'm now fitting out this 7th floor for somebody else? And it's 0.5% to 1%
It's
in
real
construction,
cost.
and it's it could be as much as 3 or maybe even 4% in building maintenance and operations.
It's real cost.
That's real money.
Yes, it's not some small money, especially when you're building $100 million buildings.
Yeah. Or especially if you are a school district, a rural school
Yes.
district that might build one building every 10 years.
Yes.
That school district also needs to save that money on construction and to save that money on operating cost. And I think AI and as you start to integrate those systems more successfully and you start to make the system queryable, then you start to position the program and construction management professional in the equation in such a way that the value is obvious.
I think the potential for technology is real. And the impacts are real. It's all about making the connection so that people and organizations can all come on board and invest. I think it's very needed. And so we can talk forever about this.
One of the things that I'm really proud of, that our team is really proud of, is that there's an on-ramp for everybody into any one of those credentials.
So you're creating a more robust way to be able to include more people into the certification through the training program.